All righty, so good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on testing thresholds and criteria, the reasonable suspicion decision making. My name is Vicki Warner. I am a senior associate with RLS and Associates. Unfortunately, Sean was unable to join us today. His little boy is sick, so he has asked me to step in and teach the webinar on his behalf. So as Julie and I was talking, as everybody was arriving, I was kind of explaining my background a little bit. I started with RLS and Associates January 1, 2005. But I've been a part of Indiana's RTAP, Rural Transit Assistance Program, since 98. And in 98, Indiana tasked me with overseeing their drug and alcohol program and the compliance of all 5311s in the state. So the joke is I've been doing drugs and alcohol since 1998 to now. I've done numerous compliance reviews, California, Nevada, North Carolina, so on and so forth. And I remember when I first started doing drugs and alcohol in 98, I went to a DAPM, Drug and Alcohol Program Manager training in Nashville, Tennessee, where this lady named Robbie Searles was teaching the class. And I remember leaving that training with this overwhelming feeling of, wow, we're doing it all wrong. And I was really stupid. I didn't know anything. So, but what I got out of that was a need and desire to really focus in on what we were doing and how we could improve those programs. I also learned as I went along that every training opportunity that I could grab a hold of had real value because of the intricacies within the regulations and associated with this program. It's hard to absorb all of the information in a single training or even a second or third training. You're always picking up on something new. You're always learning something new through these training opportunities. So the reasonable suspicion supervisor training is really pretty important in regards to the fact that we know there's an issue out there. And a lot of managers tend to be a little uncomfortable with this testing category. And we'll get into some of the reasons why as we start getting into the presentation. But the confidence that we're hoping to instill and build within you to make you more confident and comfortable with this decision-making process, the documenting of the event and what have you, it makes attending these trainings really important. And with all of that being said, I want to also throw in here that it's important to interact and be a part of that training as well. So, you know, it's like Julie and I was talking, the downside of webinars is I'm sitting here looking at a computer, talking to a computer. I know there are people on the other side, but I can't see your faces to know if maybe you had a question or maybe you need me to elaborate on that a little more. So what I'm asking for is you to interact with me. I don't want this to be a monologue of me just sitting here talking to you for 3 hours about drugs and alcohol. Let's interact, share those personal experiences relative to the topic, ask questions to help clarify your understanding and give you that confidence and reassurance for you to be able to do the job you need to do here, okay? Excuse me. So with that said, we'll start getting into the material, okay? So what must be evaluated during a reasonable suspicion circumstance includes making sure that we base our determinations on objective facts, okay? It has to be objective facts, and we have to be able to evaluate the specific, contemporaneous, and articulable observations concerning the employee's appearance, behavior, speech, and body odors. And I've used the word objective here a couple of different times because, and I think it's important to clarify that it's not how we feel. It's not what we think or what we've heard, right? It has to be objective. It has to be based on the facts. So reasonable suspicion is essentially something more than a hunch in our justice system, if you will. You have a hunch, you have reasonable suspicion, then you get preponderance of the evidence, and so on and so forth. So reasonable suspicion is essentially something more than a hunch. Um, and so hearsay, let's say, for example, somebody comes in and they're like, I saw Jane and Bill out back passing a Marlboro. They were all giggly and acting silly and chowing down on some Big O East donuts. And I'm a little concerned because it smelled funny and what have you. Well, it's probably a pretty good guess that that's not a Marlboro. But that's the hunch. That's the hearsay. So you have to substantiate the hunch with objective facts in order to have reasonable suspicion. That means you have to go out there and interact with Jane and Bill to see if you can identify behaviors that might be associated with probable drug use or alcohol misuse. Speech, the body odors, marijuana's got a smell to it. So you're looking for those smells. You're looking for bloodshot eyes. You're looking for the lackadaisical attitude and so on and so forth. And we'll get into some of the behaviors associated with the different types of drugs as we go through the presentation as well. But my point is, we have to make sure that our observations are based on objective facts, not what you know or think you know about an employee or their given situation or what somebody says. Objective facts, okay, what you can see, what you can smell, what you can hear, what you can observe in the moment concerning that employee's appearance, behavior, speech, and body odors. Now, it only takes one trained supervisor to make a determination. And they have it in the regulations as such because for a lot of small rural public transit systems, you may only have 2 staff people in the office and 2 drivers out on the road. And if one of those individuals is busy doing something else, attending a meeting or a reasonable suspicion training, then there's only one person left there to have those interactions and be able to make a determination. Now, on one of our larger agencies with multiple employees, sometimes 50 or more, they may have several managers that are trained in reasonable suspicion determinations. And as such, they may have a protocol that two trained supervisors must concur and do the interaction. And that's fine too, as long as it doesn't delay the process. But again, the rule is very clear. It only takes one trained supervisor to make that determination. And then once you make that determination, you should proceed with the testing requirements, okay? And we'll get into confidentiality and record keeping and that stuff more towards the end of the presentation, okay? All right, so I had mentioned that a lot of managers and supervisors tend to be uncomfortable with this testing category, and here's the list of the reasons why, okay? So especially in small organizations and entities, we tend to, because we're smaller, we interact more frequently, so we tend to develop broader bonds and relationships in those smaller office environments. Not that it doesn't exist in larger agencies, it does. I'm just saying that in smaller environments, the harmony of the office is more impactful because of the size of the agency. And with those relationships, sometimes comes the feelings and concerns and emotions behind making these kinds of decisions. Well, we know that Betty is going through a lot, at home with, she's going through a horrible divorce and the kids are so on and so forth. And so I'm concerned about, the loss of confidence in my employees. I'm concerned about their ability to get that paycheck and keep moving forward with life and the challenges and so on and so forth. And this is one of those situations where, yes, we develop those bonds, those relationships, and we absolutely care about our drivers. They are the most important person in the, well, second most important person in the transit agency. The passenger's the most important. The driver's the second most important person, because without them, the wheels don't roll, and we're not picking up the passengers, which is the reason we're here. So again, those relationships and those bonds are really important. But at the end of the day, if we really truly care about our employees, about our people, then we want to do reasonable suspicion. Okay. Because if we make observations that would otherwise justify a test, but we turn a blind eye because of any of these concerns, and they go out here and they get in an accident and injure or kill somebody, now they have to live with that the rest of their life. And guess what? So do you. So this is something we do because we do care. We care about our community. We care about our programs. We care about our services. And if we don't take care of the transit system today, it might not be here tomorrow for our family and loved ones, right? So we need to, put our concerns kind of to the side and focus on objective facts. Focus on safety of the service, safety of our operators. That is paramount to what we do, right? Nobody likes confrontation. I don't like confrontation. A lot of people see the reasonable suspicion testing category and the verbiage, I'm going to do a reasonable suspicion test, as kind of confrontational verbiage on the front end. And that's why, and you'll hear me say it more as we move through the presentation, when it comes to actually having the conversation, I like to use the phrase fitness for duty. Because that is essentially what we're looking to determine with a reasonable suspicion test, is that they are fit to perform their safety sensitive duties. So when it comes to the conversation and interaction and confronting the employee about your observations and the need to complete this testing requirement, we'll be talking about words to say and not to say, and you'll hear me talk more about using fitness for duty evaluation over the term reasonable suspicion. Not that we don't mention it, so we'll get to that. Okay. Lack of training in the referral process. So again, take advantage of our time here today. Ask questions, throw scenarios at me. I will tell stories. I've got quite a few of them that I can share with you over the years of doing this to help kind of put some reality into the conversation. So again, please feel free to share that information. Now, I would hope that none of our transportation providers in this country are employing anybody that we would be or have the need to feel any kind of fear for personal safety. But even if you have somebody where that might be the concern of the situation, there are always things we can do to address those concerns, up to and including even having law enforcement in the parking lot and available in the event that we need their assistance. If you have a second trained supervisor with a need to know about the program, you can have them sit in with you on that interaction. Make sure the exit's at your back and they're on the opposite side of the table. There are things we can do to address these concerns. But as a manager or supervisor, we need to always bring our focus back to the primary task of the organization, and that's providing the safest, most reliable transportation services and programs to our communities. We can't do that if we're not doing all of these other pieces and parts, and this is a big safety part, right? Okay. So it's important that supervisors know and understand the definition of reasonable suspicion, and we're kind of getting into the meat of that. The definition and roles and responsibilities of supervisors within this program, and how to recognize signs, symptoms, and behaviors of probable drug use, as well as probable alcohol misuse. So we're going to walk through those different things and accomplish the need to know task here, right? So we're going to talk about short-term indicators of probable drug use and alcohol misuse. We are going to touch on long-term indicators as well. And I want to clarify the long-term indicators are generally not sufficient to justify a reasonable suspicion test in and of themselves. But our long-term indicators, for example, are things like frequent tardiness, leaving early without notice, calling in sick or taking unplanned or unscheduled vacation time, especially on Fridays or Mondays or leading into holidays or coming out of those holidays. You start noticing an increase in passenger complaints and concerns, maybe even complaints from other coworkers about behaviors that are changing and becoming problematic. Maybe you start to notice an increase in errors within the paperwork and documentation that the drivers are required to complete each day. You start having more little minor dings backing into a mailbox or clipping something. And the one thing I like to point out in this conversation is transit systems are so desperate for drivers, especially since the pandemic. The industry as a whole took a pretty big hit with losing drivers, and we're having trouble finding folks to get back into a lot of these positions. And as such, we've seen a rash of protocols where agencies are kind of almost like, if they got a pulse and they're breathing, we'll get them in here, we can train them, which is great. Okay, we can train anybody, but we need to make sure that we're also addressing performance issues. And because we need those drivers, and we are having a hard time finding good quality folks in a lot of cases, we tend not to address performance issues in the moment. Not that we don't say anything. I'm not saying nobody addresses anything. I'm saying that we have a tendency to be a little more lenient. And that can lead to other problems. It kind of sets a precedent and the other drivers see and are aware of those kinds of things. So what I'm suggesting is, at a minimum, at least put a note to file. Address performance issues in the moment, whether it's just a conversation or it's something that rises to the level of a disciplinary action. Regardless of what it is, put a note to file. And when you see those notes to file starting to pile up, that could be a long-term indicator of a developing problem. So that's your cue, essentially, to go and spend a little more time with Libby to see, if you can substantiate your hunch, long-term indicators, that maybe there might be something going on. So you're going to start looking for the other signs and symptoms and behaviors that can substantiate that hunch in the moment, that you can articulate, detailed document, and justify that determination to test. Okay. We'll also cover and talk about initiating, substantiating, and documenting the referral process, as well as that employee intervention, where we actually bring them in, sit them down, explain our observations and the requirement to submit to the test. And then finally, we'll end with that record keeping and the documentation for the event. Okay, so that is our order of completing the training for today. Okay. All right, so short-term objective facts and physical indicators. And I'm not going to read every one of these on the slides. That's what the presentation is for, is to give you eye candy and something to look at other than me, which is good for you. So I'll hit some highlights. Again, physical indicators, there could, and believe it or not, it does occur, where we may actually see or observe physical evidence of drugs or drug paraphernalia, such as somebody throwing their bag on the break room table and rolling papers fall out with this pretty tube of crushed oregano. Then that it does happen. It has happened. So we actually observe something. Bloodshot, watery eyes. The eyes really, our eyes tell a lot, right? And that's why whenever I'm having a conversation or a training, that's why I really like in-person training, because you can tell a lot about a person and where they are in a conversation by making good eye contact, right? And I often refer back when we were kids, and we got in trouble, and mom and dad was scolding us. Where were we looking? Where were our eyes, right? And I remember as a kid, we'd always be looking down and everywhere else other than wanting to look mom or dad in the eye because we were wrong and we got caught and we knew it. As adults, when we get in trouble or we've done something wrong and it's being pointed out to us or we're being talked to about it, where are our eyes? We don't outgrow that. Even as adults, we'll have a tendency to still want to look at the floor or around or what have you. So the eyes are a really big giveaway. Bloodshot, watery eyes, you have severely constricted or overly dilated pupils, which can tell us a lot. And then you get that just kind of blank stare in there. Involuntary jerky eye movements can sometimes be associated with different types of substances that people may be abusing. So the eyes are a big one. Extensive sweating or skin clamminess, disheveled clothing or unkept grooming, and that can be something that can develop over time. So again, that can also be, that can not just be a short-term indicator, but that can also be a long-term indicator. Somebody who's always been very well groomed, very well dressed, neat, pressed, whatever, and then you start seeing that deteriorate over a period of time. That can be a long-term indicator as well as a short-term indicator where they come into work looking like they crawled out of their laundry hamper, okay? So that's what we're looking for. Those are just some of them. Physical indicators also can include runny or bleeding nose, possible puncture marks. Now, people have gotten pretty creative in regards to puncture marks. They know that people look for them, and that's a dead giveaway. So a lot of folks have gotten pretty creative, and they go between the toes or the inner thighs, places that are not necessarily exposed for anybody to see. Unfortunately, if their addiction becomes severe enough, they will reach a point to where they don't care. They're just focused on getting it in there. But as a general rule, that's something that is more likely hidden unless we start seeing other signs and symptoms, and then it's reached that point, okay? Frequent wetting of the lips or complaining of dry mouth, sensation of bugs crawling under the skin, which results in them scratching and itching and creating sores about their face and different parts of their body. So you'll see that. And this is just a picture of some examples of some of the drug paraphernalia that is out there. It's a drop in the bucket. You can literally go to a Marathon gas station and buy some of the glass bongs and pipes and what have it, or go to Lowe's and go to the plumbing departments and make your own. So people have gotten pretty creative, and with the legalization in some states for both medicinal and recreational marijuanas, there's this whole industry that has cropped up, and there's even more out there than there ever was before, including all kinds of containers for transporting and hiding and taking it out in public and it not being obvious. Okay. So this is just some examples of some of the containers. You get people traditionally use plastic baggies. The 35 millimeter film canisters were really popular for many years. Pill bottles, breath mint containers, cigarette packs. But again, as I've already stated, there's a whole industry that's cropped up. So the lipstick you see in the picture, it's a real thing. You know, it looks like a lipstick, acts like a lipstick, but it's got a hidden compartment for somebody to carry or transport their stuff. There's also a version of the lipstick that it turns into a pipe, so that you can, you know, smoke wherever you go. They have highlighters. It looks like a orange highlighter you would use at the office, but it turns into a pipe. So again, there's lots of different things out there that we're seeing in the industry that make it easier for people to kind of hide and keep these things under wraps. Now, I had mentioned the severely restricted or overly dilated pupils as a pretty good indicator. And I've already elaborated on how important the eyes are in being a great way of making an assessment. So just to elaborate on that just a little bit further, when we're indoors, I'm sitting in an office with a warm lamp behind my laptop here. The windows are open, but because of the low lighting, my eyes are probably a little more dilated so that more light can get in and I can see better. But if I step outside into that sunshine, and we do have a sunshiny day here today, as soon as I step out into that sunshine, that bright light is going to be kind of hurtful. So that's when we start squinting, and that's when our eyes dilate. Our pupils will dilate to let less light in to help us maintain our vision, but it doesn't hurt as bad. Somebody under the influence of illegal drugs and substances, their eyes tend to do the opposite of what they should be doing. And that's why we have this slide and why we talk about the eyes being such an important indicator when communicating and making those assessments. Okay. All right, so behavioral indicators. Hyperactivity, somebody who is really fidgety or easily agitated. They may be complaining of nausea or actually be dealing with some vomiting. They may have unstable or uncoordinated walking, kind of stumbling around a little bit, maybe dragging feet, or they may just have poor coordination in general. Okay. Now, some of these I'll probably go through a little quicker to get to our end message here. So at any point in time, if you have questions, comment, or commentary, please chime in. A lot of times individuals who are starting to abuse or are abusing illegal substances or misusing alcohol, they will become very suspicious or paranoid about anybody else picking up or finding out. And that will often lead to them being a little more stressed. It can also lead to depression, and they will kind of try and separate themselves from the herd, if you will. So if I'm not spending as much time around people or interacting as much, then it won't be as easy for them to pick up on what's going on with me. So you'll see that kind of withdrawal from interactions with coworkers and the like. They could also develop that lackadaisical, it's all good, I got this, no big deal attitude. But then we see the opposite in the actual performance. They could also become very irritable or moody, so that can lead to an increase in customer complaints, even more strife between drivers, arguing or disagreeing about things. But it can also lead to extreme fatigue, sleeping on the job, micro sleeps and the like. And we don't need sleepy bunnies driving the buses, right? I remember getting a call from a manager here a few years ago where she had received complaints. So a couple of her drivers had come in and said, hey, we saw so-and-so asleep in their vehicle parked behind the bank downtown there, and I know he's got a little downtime, but that seems a little odd, you know. And the manager started to radio the guy when the phone rang, and there was a passenger that called in and said, hey, this driver, something's not okay with him. He's slurring his words. He's driving a little aggressively, and we almost got hit by a semi. And so she calls me up and she's like, I've got this situation that I'm hearing. What do I do? I said, go see him, go find him. Don't let him keep driving. If we have, concerns about his operation, we don't want to ask him to drive to the office. I said, go find him. Tell him wherever you are, just stay put. I'm coming to you. I need to talk to you. And she said, okay. And she hung up the phone. And about an hour later, I get a call back that said, and she's like, I radioed the driver and told him to come to the office, but he hasn't showed up. And now he's not responding. What do I do? I said, you figure out where that bus is and you go find him. Hang up the phone, get in a vehicle, go find the driver. Don't let him drive anymore. Make your assessment. If you can substantiate what other people are telling us, then you're going to do a test. Lo and behold, the outcome of the story, I'll take you straight to the end here. She followed my direction. She went and found the guy. She got him out of the bus. She substantiated the hunch. Slurred words, bloodshot, watery eyes, staggering, and he reeked of alcohol. She took him in for the reasonable suspicion test. He tested 3 times the legal limit. Okay, so we absolutely must respond and react to those things, right? And that is a perfect example of how that information that comes in and how we respond to that information. So those indicators, both told by the passengers as well as the drivers, again, the manager had to substantiate the hunch. She couldn't just go off of the hearsay, which is why I directed her to go out and find the driver. So they also could be very loud and boisterous or quiet and whispering. They may have, their speech may be very rapid and pressured. Sometimes, if we've ever spent any time around anybody else who was under the influence of alcohol, when folks are inebriated enough, sometimes they feel the need to exaggerate their words in order to make it come out right. So that's a pretty good giveaway, right? And then also there's the potential for them to become inappropriate in their speech and then start throwing around some of those unpleasant curse words as well. Okay. Performance indicators include inability to concentrate, delayed decision making, diminished concentration, reduced sense of alertness for our safety zone, our space cushion, what is going on around the vehicle as well as on board the vehicle. And we're likely to see that increase in errors, either in driving the vehicle, in paperwork errors count, or with those interactions, even whether it's between coworkers or with passengers, right? Body odors, it can include odors of alcohol on the breath or a person's clothing. It can include a distinct pungent aroma about the person or on their clothing. It could also include a strong chemical odor or a strong smell of cat urine, which I used to get a chuckle when I taught the class in person, because when I said that one, I could tell by the looks on people's faces in the room, they were like, cat urine, oh, what the... Well, if you look at the picture that includes some of the chemicals used to make some of our synthetic drugs like methamphetamines, ammonia is one of those main products, and that's where that reference comes from. Okay. So the effects of alcohol consumption, if you've ever had a drink before and had one too many, we all kind of know what the effects can be, right? And it could include flushing, dizziness, staggering, slurred speech, mood changes, loss of inhibitions, as well as it can lead to unconsciousness, right? Now, alcohol is a little different than drugs, right? So drugs are always illegal. We can test for drugs anytime the employee is on duty. If anybody's been through the DAPM trainings, hopefully you have the understanding that alcohol being a legal substance, we can only test for it immediately prior to, during, or immediately following the performance of a safety-sensitive duty under the DOT. Now, that being said, some transit entities have in their policies that they'll test for alcohol anytime the employee is on duty. which is fine. You can do that. But if they are not about to perform, are performing, or just completed performing a safety sensitive function, that would be a non-DOT test. So it's important to understand that policy requirement and how it plays with the rule. Okay. So it is a legal substance, and in moderation, that's fine. No big deal. We all you have our little social gatherings or what have you. We come together, a glass of wine or a beer or what have. Not a big deal. The problem enters when we get carried away, when we consume in excess, or we have a goal of reaching plastered, right? That's when alcohol consumption can really become a problem, and it can lead to alcoholism, birth defects, fetal alcohol syndrome, pancreatic damage, hepatitis, cirrhosis of the liver, as well as many other negative health impacts, right? So it's important to have a basic knowledge and understanding of the dangers associated with alcohol misuse or abuse. And while there's nothing in the regulations that really requires us to do training for our frontline staff on alcohol. So in the regulations, we have a requirement to train them, give them a 60-minute training on the signs, symptoms, and behaviors of probable drug use and the effects on health, life, work, and so on and so forth. But alcohol isn't a requirement, at least not currently in the regulations, but it is strongly recommended and a best practice. And I think it is important for employees to have some kind of education or training about alcohol misuse or abuse to help them to understand some of the facts associated. Now, our national RTAP program, National Rural Transit Assistance Program, houses and hosts a employee substance abuse awareness training module. It's an e-learning training module. It's free, and free is always good, right? I think it's like an hour and 20 minutes, but it has an alcohol component with it, as well as a test to make sure that the participant was involved, and it's timed to make sure that they get that 1 hour window in. And so they have to watch all of the videos and answer all of the questions. And if they end early, it will make them start over. That's how we ensure they get the 60 minutes. And then once they're done, it provides a certificate for you to have on record to show that you have met your training obligation. Now, I'm not trying to sell a training, but I am promoting the idea of if you're not using an established program such as the National RTAP program, that we integrate or have something regarding alcohol in whatever program we are using, okay? And as I start going through this, hopefully it will help you to better understand the reason why we're making those recommendations, okay? So what is one drink, right? It depends on what you're drinking, and there are differences between wine, beer, and liquor, right? So for the purposes of the conversation, in order to get 0.6 fluid ounces of pure alcohol for our hard liquors, we're looking at 1.5 fluid ounces at 40% alcohol by volume. Now, you and I know, or anybody who has ever consumed alcohol, been to a liquor store or a bar, know and understand that different alcohol or different liquors have different percentage by volume, right? So there's Everclear, which is like 100% proof or something like that. I mean, so there's varying levels. But again, for the purposes of the conversation, 40% alcohol by volume to get that pure alcohol of 0.6 fluid ounces. 12-ounce can of beer at 5% alcohol per volume. But again, beer, like hard liquors, they can vary. You can get 3%. When I attended the FDA Drug and Alcohol Conference in Little Rock, Arkansas, there's a awesome little restaurant, brewery place down there on the main street, the Flying Saucer, I think it was called, and they had beers of the world. They like had a manual, And I remember looking through there at some of them, and they had a Belgian beer that was 16% alcohol per volume. So again, those can vary. 5-ounce glass of wine at 12-ounce, 12% alcohol per volume. Again, just to get that 0.6. But just like the others, wine, I've had 15 and even 18% alcohol per volume. Okay. But just for this conversation, that's what we're looking at. So let's take a male driver, and we'll go with the 180-pound window. Okay. How many drinks does it take for a male driver to test positive? Now, state levels for an alcohol positive, a lot of states are at 0.08. What is the state level for Nebraska? Is it 0.08 as well? Can anybody tell me? Just out of curiosity. And Cindy, I do see your question, and this conversation is going to provide that answer here in just a couple of minutes, if you'll bear with me.
It is 0.08, Vicki. It is 0.08.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Julie. I appreciate that. So your state level is 0.08, but under the DOT, it's 0.04. Right? But under the DOT regulations, we also have this window of 0.02 to 0.039, where it's non-negative, but it's not positive under the DOT either. And at a minimum, the regulations require you to remove that individual from safety-sensitive duty for up to 8 hours until their next scheduled shift, whichever is longer, or until they test below that 0.02 level. And most agencies have that verbiage in your policy. Again, it's a federal requirement at a minimum. And some agencies have said, oh, they're showing up to work between 0.02 to 0.039. That means they had alcohol in their system, and we're zero tolerance. So some agencies go further, but you have to add that verbiage if you're going to do that. Otherwise, you're just giving them the day off or until they test below the 0.02 level. So if you think about it, and we look at a 180-pound male driver, it only takes one drink to hit that 0.02 level, right? And I've heard all of the discussions and the arguments over the years of, well, you know, I've been drinking beer for a lot of years. I've worked really hard on fixing up a good refrigerator in there. It doesn't bother me like other people. I've heard the arguments. And there is some differences between men and women and weights, body types, but the fact of the matter is any amount of alcohol impacts us, okay? And we're not always aware of some of those impacts until we get a little further into it and some of the other signs and symptoms start to present themselves. So for example, our peripheral vision is one of the first things that is going to be impacted. And if we're not thinking about it or focused on it or paying attention to it, we're not going to recognize that until the slurring starts or some of the other behaviors start. So the point is, it doesn't matter body type, weight, how many years or anything else, any amount of alcohol is going to start impacting us. We just may not be as aware of it, right? So let's look at a female driver. And we'll do a 160-pound female driver. Again, one drink is going to put her into that 0.02 to 0.039 threshold where you're going to have to send them home or next scheduled shift or till they test below the 0.02 level. So again, it's really important to have these conversations with the drivers, and this will better answer your questions, Cindy, and get to the point that I'm trying to make. Margaret is a 140-pound paratransit operator celebrating a friend's birthday on Thursday night. Woohoo! She has a total of 33 ounces of wine with her friends, right? It was a good party, yeah, 33 ounces of wine. But she has to work Friday morning, so she has her last drink at midnight, and she takes a taxi home. Good, responsible driver, right? Takes the taxi home, and she quits drinking at midnight. But here's the thing. You don't get to start deducting until you stop drinking, okay? So she drank 33 ounces of wine with her friends, and that's equivalent to 6 glasses at 5 ounces per glass. So her blood alcohol level at midnight was 0.19. So thank goodness she took that taxi home, right? Will she be sober for her 9 a.m. shift? So we have to do the math, right? So again, midnight, she's 0.19. And the body can literally only rid itself of alcohol at a rate of about 0.15 an hour, right? And that's an hour. So let's divide that and add that up. We'll do the math. We're looking at 12 hours and 40 minutes for the alcohol to be out of her system enough that she would test below the 0.02 level. So if she stops at midnight and she's got to start driving at 9 o'clock in the morning, she's not going to be ready until 1 o'clock. So that means she's going to be reporting under the influence. And no, there's no amount of cold showers, hot coffee, or hanging your head out the window at 55 miles an hour that's going to sober you up any quicker or rid the body of that alcohol. Time is the only thing that can rid the body of the alcohol. And I think more than anything, that's why it is important to have this at a minimum conversation about alcohol with your employees so that they understand. And they don't show up to work, get popped for a test, and then, it was last night, help them to understand that alcohol does stick around and it takes time. So they need to be thinking about what they're doing, what they're consuming, how much they're consuming, and how much time they're going to need for that to be able to be out of their system, right? So that's the big message. I think for me in making sure those drivers understand about alcohol, okay? And we know driving skills that are affected by alcohol use, reaction times, coordination, focus, and we've already talked about the alcohol found in beer, wine, and liquor is not the same. It varies depending on the product that you purchase, whether you mix it with other products to make a yummy tropical drink or something, that can make a difference in that as well. So again, no amount of coffee or showers or anything is going to help that. And the difference between alcohol use and alcohol abuse is where when a person becomes focused on, oh man, I can't wait to get off. I really need a beer. I need to get home and have a beer. Oh wow, I got to pick up a case of beer on the way home so I can start my weekend right. When people are focused on the need for the next drink, that's when a lot of times, and I say that, but it's a regular part of the conversation. Okay. There are days I get off work and I'm like, whew, I could really use a drink today. That doesn't mean I'm an alcoholic or developing a problem. That's not what I'm saying. But when it's a part of somebody's everyday verbiage, when they're always referencing that or thinking about it or planning for it, that's when it's starting to cross that threshold. Now, we got a lot of folks who are very good working alcoholics, but that doesn't mean that we don't have the potential for health problems associated, and then it can affect the work environment. So that's kind of the difference in my understanding and the best way that I can explain it, right? Now, according to state law, we've already addressed that, but has your system addressed the 0.02 to 0.039 threshold? Is it clearly outlined in your policy? Have you exceeded the federal requirement of, at a minimum, removing them, as I've already explained? Have you gone further? So it's going to be really important for you to also know what your policy says in regards to that element. So that way, if you end up in that situation, you don't inadvertently violate your own policy or the protocol that you should be following there. Okay. All right. So when does a hangover start and when does it end? Well, it depends on how much we drink and what we're drinking, right? And here's the thing about hangovers, and usually in classroom, it's a back and forth. I ask the question and we have a little more fun with this. But hangovers, sleepy, fatigued, headache, eye ache, nausea, And all of those things also still have the ability to affect our focus, our reaction times, our ability to maintain our focus on our primary task. So the hangover essentially can be just as dangerous as the alcohol itself. That's also an important conversation to have with employees about alcohol misuse and abuse to help them understand. And we want to promote an environment that employees feel comfortable and confident approaching their manager, whether it's, hey, I had too much fun at the Super Bowl party last night. I'm feeling pretty rough this morning. And I just want to be honest and upfront with you. I don't know if I'll be able to really focus today or what have you. We want to create an environment where employees feel comfortable coming to us. That can be even true for somebody who has a cold and is taking an over-the-counter medication. It's a prescription and over-the-counter medications are just as much a part of this overall conversation as anything else. So we want to create that environment where people are comfortable coming to us and letting us know if there are concerns about their ability to perform safety sensitive functions, as well as it's important for supervisors to interact and get to know their employees. So we know what's normal behavior, what's abnormal behavior, so we can recognize it when it begins to happen, if you will. Okay. So again, any amount of alcohol, a hangover is just as dangerous as the alcohol itself. And I've already kind of spoken to some of the skills affected by alcohol use or misuse, as well as the effects of a hangover. So again, judgment, reaction times, coordination, short-term memory. When you're hungover, you're not feeling good. What are you thinking about? Or is driving got your full attention, or are you also thinking, oh my God, my head is killing me? I may need a brown bag. I'm likely to barf here in a minute. And if I don't, I can't wait to get out of here so I can get home and lay down and what have you, then that's taking away from the focus on the task of driving, from the task of serving those passengers, and so on and so forth. So it is absolutely just as dangerous the next day. Okay. All right, so Cindy, did that officially and completely answer your inquiry about after their last drink, how many hours until they can drive? And I'll watch for your response in that chat. Yes, very good. All right, thank you, Cindy. I appreciate that. All right, so as we close in on the end of the first hour of our presentation, Sean suggested that I take a break at the 1 hour mark for the 3 hours. So we'll take one now and we'll take one in an hour after we return. Because especially when you're sitting here staring at a computer, it's really nice to get even just 10 minutes to get up and kind of walk around, stretch, get the blood flowing. So that way we can come back and focus on the task at hand here and pay attention. But I forgot something that Sean told me I needed to do for this webinar. So forgive me as I kind of click back through here and make sure where I have missed this. So here's what I'm going to do. The yellow star on certain slides indicates a test question. So there is a test associated with today's webinar, but I'm literally going to give you the answers. The test is a way of us measuring whether or not you were actually involved and engaged with the webinar and paying attention to what's going on, kind of thing. So for the first test question, we had a yellow star on the examples of drug paraphernalia. So I apologize for getting to point this out and mention it. What drug is on the black tin can in this picture? And the answer is marijuana. So I'm giving you the question and the answer. So anytime there's a yellow star, and I'll try and catch them as we move forward so I don't make this mistake again, but I wanted to go back and capture them because I saw that one pass just a second ago. So that was the first one. The second one is, of course, the case study. And, Margaret, the driver, consumes what amount of wine during her celebration with friends? And the answer is 1 liter of wine. Okay, is how much she consumed during that celebration. Okay, and I want to say that catches us up, and I'll do better on the next 4 as we go through. Okay, welcome back, everybody. So I saw as we started the break, Cindy, you needed me to elaborate a little bit more. In the chat, it says, because of a hangover, we take them out of safety sensitive driving. That's a local decision. I'm not suggesting that that is, in fact, what you must do. I'm simply suggesting that that should be something that you should be open to the possibility of maybe happening. And again, it's about creating an environment where our folks feel comfortable coming and talking to us about, maybe they're just sick and they're taking an over-the-counter medication and they don't want to let you down. So they show up anyway, but they're really not feeling good. And that can take away from our focus, our ability to focus on our primary task of what we're doing, right? And that everybody, including all of us, at some point in our time of our lives, have pushed ourselves harder than maybe we should have. So literally all I'm saying is I would encourage you to create an environment where your operators feel comfortable coming to tell you or talk to you about, hey, I hadn't been feeling good. I took this medicine. It's made me pretty lethargic and blah, blah, blah. I'm more than happy to do what I need to do. But now you get to be the one to make an informed decision about putting them on the road. So I'm not saying you must or you have to. I'm saying that we should be open to the possibility. I'm saying we should create an environment where our operators feel comfortable and confident in coming and talking to us about their ability to perform their duties and what other options may exist if that becomes a concern. So I hope that I've clarified a little further for you and answered your question. But if not, Cindy, please let me know. I'm more than happy to have a broader conversation if need be. Okay? Okay. All right. It's a pretty marijuana leaf. Isn't it pretty? It's pretty. I was one of those really naive, you are more than welcome, Cindy, naive kids. I never done any of that. Didn't know anything about it until I got this job. In fact, my first exposure was attending the Indianapolis 500 on the infield with the crowds and what have you when I was 21. So I was like drinking age, but that I first was ever around it, smelled it, or knew anything about it. And then it was kind of like taboo for me. And then lo and behold, I landed a job and here I am teaching drugs and alcohol and doing compliance reviews and have been for several years. So yeah, it's not just a pretty leaf, right? Marijuana can negatively impact transit operators and lead to health risks associated with its use. So marijuana effects absolutely include slower reaction times. It affects short-term memory, the individual's ability to process or process quickly. And behind the wheel, that's just a tragedy because things happen split second when operators are behind the wheel. So anybody under the influence of this substance, that is a very scary and dangerous thing. It decreases an individual's awareness of vehicle control. So judging speed and distances, judging turns for the corner or clearances can become more challenging and difficult and lead to an increased likelihood of an incident. It affects peripheral vision as well. It impairs a person's ability to concentrate or focus on a single task and process and work through that. They could just get stuck sitting there staring at it, right? And it does reduce awareness and perception of diminished skill levels. So they may think that they are able to perform and do great, but they're doing 30 on the interstate, right? And they think they're going the speed limit. It doesn't matter that everybody's just blowing by, those are the kind of impacts. And I remember several years ago, some of you may remember they had a commercial of the 2 crash test dummies sharing a drink in the car and before they run down the road and in their sled test and crash into a concrete wall. And the message from that commercial was pretty important. Drinking and driving is dangerous, and it can lead to, severe injuries and death. And then for a short period of time, and I don't know why, it only aired for maybe a couple of months. They done a almost identical commercial, but instead of sharing a drink, the 2 crash test dummies were passing a joint between them before they run down the test track and slammed into the concrete. And I thought it was a really good message in that it really drove home the point that using marijuana and driving is just as dangerous, if not more so, than drinking and driving, right? And it will absolutely have that impact on a driver's ability to read, understand signage, traffic flows, reaction times, and so on and so forth. So it is absolutely a dangerous drug. It can be addictive. Effects of marijuana use is felt within minutes and can reach peak in 10 to 30 minutes. But that also depends on what they're getting, what the THC content of that product is, and how they're smoking it, whether they're using a pipe, water bong, a vape pen, so on and so forth. Sometimes the route of administration or the type of marijuana that they're using can make a difference there. Now, a typical smoker can experience a high for approximately 2 hours, but again, with some of the products, so one example is they have this new thing called butter or wax, and it's like literally where they cook the oils out of the marijuana plant so that you have a brown sticky substance that looks like wax. They refer to it as doing dabs, and they'll take a dab of that wax and they'll put it in a pipe and they'll smoke it. Okay. And that product is a significant concentration of THC within that product. So it can produce an immediate intense high that can last for hours. And it's questionable whether or not that person can return to baseline within 24 hours. So again, it's going to depend on what they're using, what the THC content is. Okay. And it's even with standard marijuana use, it is debatable whether psychological effects return to a baseline within 3 to 5 hours or after that 24-hour window. So you can imagine, and I have seen some law enforcement video talking about the butter or the wax and how these folks can literally remain high for up to 24 hours. So then you have the residual effects of it after that, which could last potentially another 24 hours or longer. And it's questionable whether psychomotor impairment can persist after the high is dissipated. So there is some potential for lingering effects to still be impacting that person or their ability to concentrate or focus or perform those safety sensitive duties. So that's why it's a dangerous drug. Now, I also want to be clear in that federal law supersedes state and local laws. So it doesn't matter if they, drive to a state, go on vacation in Colorado, and, they have a really good time in Colorado. They come back to work. If they have consumed, then if they're tested, that test will stand, right? So federal law supersedes all state and local laws, okay? Common names for marijuana. We'll talk about some health risks associated, which are very similar to that of somebody smoking cigarettes. You know, a lot of the dangers there. Any amount of marijuana that is smoked before it has the ability to impair an individual. And how long do the effects of marijuana remain after smoking a joint? Again, it's going to depend on what they're smoking, what the THC content of that is, and then how long before it gets out of the person's system. Now, that one, again, is going to vary depending on the level of use. Are they a weekend user? Are they an everyday user? What are they smoking? How much of it they are smoking? But the potential is there for that marijuana to still be identified up to 30 days out after use. So they do it today, but they stop, it could still be picked up 3 weeks later and into that 4th week after they've stopped that use. Okay. So common names for marijuana, and this is a short list, a very short list of common street names, and I can let you read through there. But there's, as they create hybrids and different versions and so on and so forth, they come up with names for them. So you've got like white diesel, wedding cake, you've got golden goat. I'm trying to remember some of the ones I have seen or heard over the years. You know, grape zaza, runts, so on. So there's lots of names. Twinkies is a popular one, right? And things out there. And it's good to kind of familiarize ourselves a little bit with some of the lingo, because again, that could be a hunch if we're hearing somebody having those conversations and talking about these kinds of things. So, as I said before, the health risks associated are very similar to that of a smoker. So the potential for respiratory disease and COPD and so on and so forth from taking, you know, that product into our lungs. And then effects of other unknown drugs that could have been added. A lot of people are starting to mix things these days, dipping their joints in PCP or what have you. So there's always the danger associated with that. It does increase a person's blood pressure and accelerates their heart rate. And I've heard many of folks over the years argue, well, you can't die from marijuana. Well, that might be true, but the marijuana can cause your blood pressure to skyrocket and your heart to increase to the point that you have a heart attack, right? So it can be a contributing factor in some health-related emergency situations, right? It can also lead to brain damage. So that butter or wax that I was kind of explaining or talking about a little bit, because of the massive amount of concentrated THC in that, there has been some incidences where individuals have suffered from brain damage because they could not handle that really high concentrated amount of that THC. It does have the ability to decrease a person's immune system. So someone who is using or abusing is likely to use their sick time more frequently than others, or take that time off because they're feeling bad or they're dealing with more colds and sicknesses and things like that. Now, we also have to keep in mind that as people get older, those things kind of naturally become a challenge for us. But again, those are all things to look for and the impacts. Okay. Now, as I've already kind of explained with the whole crash test dummy commercial discussion, after alcohol, marijuana is absolutely the most frequently detected psychoactive substance among our driving population. Those states where it has been legalized, they have had to identify methods for determining what is okay, what is the testing threshold for that would qualify as a driving under the influence, and so those states have had to kind of navigate that to figure that out. The reality of it is any amount of marijuana, just like any amount of alcohol, has the ability to impair. And again, it begins with that peripheral vision that a lot of us would not notice or pick up on unless we were thinking about it or looking for it. It has the ability to impair driving performance for up to 3 hours. But again, there's still some potential for residual effects that could go into that 24-hour window. So again, any amount of use is too much. It decreases their awareness and ability to handle the vehicle and adjust their driving according to changing conditions. Which speaks to the reduction in reaction times, perception, as well as reaction, and then it affects braking distances, right? So it takes the average driver who's all that in a bag of chips, got a good night's sleep, 3/4 of a second for their brain to go, oh, that's bad. I should react, right? And then all that in a bag of chips driver, 3/4 of a second for their brain to tell their foot to move from the accelerator to the pedal. So you have the perception distance, you have the reaction distance. Now we add the braking distance, right? Which is once the brakes are applied. So if we have anything that could be impairing or causing that driver to lose that primary focus on operation, that can affect perception distances. So we can increase that perception of a need for an emergency up to a second and a half. Now at 20 miles an hour, they're going to travel 20 feet. Just perceiving the need for an emergency situation and to react to it. And then you add in the reaction distances. And again, if they're not feeling good, if they're worrying about how bad they're feeling or what have you, then that can affect their reaction times. So again, 20 mile an hour, you're looking at 22 feet to react. Okay, so we can bump that up to a second and a half, so we can take that up to 30, 35 feet. And then you have the actual stopping distance, which at 20 miles an hour, I believe it was 65 feet of actual, or potentially up to 65 feet of actual stopping distance. So, or that was the total. Anyway, the point is, it affects all of those things, whether we realize it or not. So again, any amount is too much in the transit industry, and federal law still supersedes all state and local laws. Okay. People under the influence of marijuana are also more likely to be subjected to sleepiness as they start to come down off of their little high, if you will. Sometimes that can lead to drowsiness or fatigue, and that will also lead to challenges with focus, reaction time, perception distances, and ability to focus on the task at hand. And of course, without question, mixing alcohol and marijuana will likely dramatically increase the potential effects of either one. Okay. All right, so here we have some examples. You got your brick form there for sale. You got you some joints rolled up there on the bottom right. A bud on the bottom left, ready to be crumbled up and smoked. And then in the top left, you've got the crumbled bud there, if you will, that people may choose to use. So just to kind of give you a visual on that, what that kind of looks like, and why oftentimes a lot of people make the joke or refer to oregano as being the mystery item in that tube, if you will. Okay. All right, so from there, we are going to talk about some cocaine now. Again, if anybody has any questions about the marijuana category, please put those through and let me know. I think it would be reasonable and appropriate to go ahead and address the CBD oil thing. I know most states, including our state, has legalized the use of CBD oils, but it's really important to help drivers understand that a lot of times that state legislation still allows for some THC content and them to still put a label on that bottle that says no THC. So for example, the state of Indiana allows up to 0.3 0.03% of THC to still exist in the product, and they have that label that says no THC. The state of Tennessee, it's 0.5%. So it's a little bit higher. So it's important to make sure that drivers understand that they are responsible for what they use, consume, rub on their bodies. You know, they got the hemp lotions and CBD oil lotions and stuff that you can, you know, it rubs the lotion on its skin, but they're responsible for what's in that product, right? So they have to know and understand that if they test positive for THC and they're using one of these products, there is no medical explanation. It will stand as a positive test, and the agency will have to follow the agency's policy in regards to disciplinary action. So at a minimum, we should be having some kind of a conversation or providing some kind of education to our employees about that, because I know a lot of folks are using CBD oils, and that's great, especially if it helps with things, but they just need to understand that they are likely using at their own risk. Okay. All right. So back to cocaine. All right. The effects of cocaine use can include accelerated heart rate. It leads to addiction, a terrible addiction at that. Nasal congestion, increased blood pressure. It can also result in cardiac arrest, respiratory arrest, stroke, death. All very bad stuff. It's a very nasty, bad, terrible drug, and sometimes getting away from it or the treatment for it can be just as dangerous, right? So some of the characteristics associated with cocaine use include a person engaging or willingly engaging in reckless behavior, whether it's reckless in the way they're operating or the way they're just doing anything. They're likely to also be more impulsive in how they handle tasks or approach tasks, and may not always necessarily follow protocol. They're also more unpredictable under the influence of this substance. They oftentimes feel a sense of alertness and well-being that is actually kind of false. So they feel more in control and able to handle things, and in reality, they may not be. So they can be very unpredictable in that regards. They will also have a level of paranoia that accompanies that abuse, if you will. And again, so you're likely to see them kind of become a little more depressed. They might exhibit a little more anxiety and withdraw from interacting very much with coworkers, managers, supervisors, or even passengers, to reduce the likelihood of any of those interactions leading to a suspicion. So that paranoia is going to be pretty big there. Okay. All right. So duration of effects with cocaine abuse include injecting cocaine, which can produce effects within 15 to 30 minutes. A hit of smoked crack, so that's a pipe hit or a bong hit or something like that, I guess, produces an almost immediate intense experience. And this will typically produce effects that can last 5 to 15 minutes. But like some of the other products, marijuana I was just talking about, it might also depend on what they've got, how pure it is. And there is always the potential for it to also be mixed with other substances like fentanyl or PCP or the like. Now, snorting cocaine can produce effects almost immediately, and the resulting high can last 15 to 30 minutes. So the duration of whatever perceived pleasure they're getting out of that is very, very short. And because of the after effects, that oftentimes is what drives individuals back to using more of that substance, is so they can get past the feel bads and get back to their perceived feel goods, if you will. Okay, so after effects of cocaine use include restlessness. So they've been on this go, 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 I can handle it, I'm in control. false sense of power and control and everything, to all of a sudden they're restless because they don't have that feeling anymore, and they don't know what to do with what is happening inside them, and that leads to anxiety, depression, and you combine those three things, you get exhaustion, right? Mental fatigue, because the brain is also trying to recover to what we just put it through as well, right? And then again, that paranoia is going to increase with each use, and then dealing with those after effects, to the point where they are likely to develop an intense craving for more of the drug, and be a little preoccupied with what do they got to do, and how can they get to a point to where they can get more of that, so they can get back to this perceived good feeling that they had, if you will. So and this is one of those situations, this is that type of drug to where the people who have have this type of addiction, that preoccupation and intense craving, well, these are the folks that they get driven to the point to where they'll steal from their own family members. It doesn't matter how much they love you, don't ever want to hurt you or anything else. The drug has such a hold on them that those things don't matter anymore. The drug is what matters. That's the impact there. Okay. Okay, so did I skip one? Nope, I did not. So some other conditions that may also cause similar symptoms, and this is kind of interesting, and I think it's also important to note. Hyperactivity, nervousness, stress, fear, or even hypertension can demonstrate similar symptoms to that type of drug use, cocaine use. Okay. And I think I'm going to go ahead and mention it here. I'll reiterate as we get through the other drag categories. As we go through these discussions, I think it's important to note that the signs, symptoms, behaviors, odors are kind of similar from one to the other. So it's going to be very hard for you to diagnose, and we're not diagnosing anybody, right? That's what the test is for. The test is going to tell us what's going on if we have enough observable facts, objective facts, to substantiate, detailed document our observations in the moment in order that test. We have to think and consider alternatives as we're making those evaluations. And again, we'll discuss that in more detail as we move forward. Now, the effects of crack use includes a short and very intense high, but there's also an abrupt halt to that intense high that they have, which is going to lead them into a very deep depression. And again, back to that intense craving and preoccupation with getting more of that substance and getting back to that perceived good place, if you will. Okay. Now, effects of withdrawal, and this is what drives a lot of people back or makes the recovery or getting away from this substance so challenging, difficult, and in some cases even dangerous. The crash can last from 9 hours to 4 days. So imagine you felt good and then you felt bad, and then you felt great and then you felt bad, and now I got to do this, I got to get away from it, but you have to feel bad for so many days before you can start to see the relief. Smoking cigarettes is one of the hardest, most addictive products out there. I think in a lot of cases more addictive than a lot of these. And you're never more than one bad day and an opportunity away from making that mistake. For folks, this dragging on, dealing with these withdrawal symptoms and what have you, that gets just as hard, if not harder, right? The withdrawal symptoms can last from 1 to 3 weeks, right? So the crash, which includes agitation, depression, insomnia, and an intense craving for the drug, that's 9 hours to 4 days. But overall, those withdrawal symptoms, 1 to 3 weeks. So that fatigue, that anxiety, irritability, paranoia, and disorientation, you got to deal with that for 1 to 3 weeks before you can get past that. And that's where a lot of people falter on being able to rehabilitate and get away from this type of substance. You feel bad for so long, you get so desperate for anything to help you to feel better, and that's why some folks fall back into it. Okay. So we're going to talk about common street names for cocaine. Besides the addiction of physical risk directly related with its use, what are some other risks? And I'll elaborate on that a little bit as we go through. And who are the potential victims of cocaine use by public transit officials? And this is public transit officials, but I think it's everybody. All of us. Everybody in this country is a victim of substance abuse and or alcohol misuse and abuse. We're all victims, right? It doesn't matter if we're directly impacted by somebody through accident or injury. It doesn't matter if it's a family member, a loved one, or a close friend that has an issue. Everybody is impacted. People who misuse or abuse illegal drugs or substances often have more incidences. They have more illnesses. They have more sickness because their immune systems are often profoundly impacted. As those things occur, whether or not they have insurance that helps them to cover the doctor's appointments and emergency room visits or not, becomes a part of the equation. And that can lead to increases in medical care for the actual paying customers, right? And that's how we're all victims, right? It affects insurance rates. It affects, medical treatment, and so on and so forth. Not to mention, it leads to injuries and death. That impacts everybody, right? So I think everybody is the victim of substance abuse or alcohol misuse and abuse. It's not specific to just the cocaine drug category. Okay, I think we all are victims in that regards. Okay, crack is considered so much more dangerous than cocaine. It's kind of like where they cook it down. It's not as pure. Crack is more likely to have other substances added to it, and that can make it much more dangerous, especially with the concentration of what the substance in there, that really intense high that they can get from that. That's where the danger is, right? And then why do people become addicted? Well, again, this substance, it could be a one-use addiction. And once they get there, it's hard to get away from. Sometimes it's peer pressure, at a party or a gathering with friends or what have you, or there's all kinds of reasons and methods and whys as to why people do that first time. Sometimes through no fault of their own or unbeknownst to them. Maybe somebody slipped them a Mickey. But once they have that feeling, again, it can be consuming. So common street names for cocaine. And again, this is a short list. So we want to make sure that I just saw the yellow star, so I want to make sure that I don't forget to do the test question here. So again, there's a much longer list of street names associated. So again, familiarizing ourselves with some of that verbiage could be valuable. So on the test, the question will be on the slide, which listed common names for cocaine. There was a moving picture of smoke. What image was formed by the smoke? And we can see that that image is a skull. So I done good on remembering that one. Okay. All right. So from there, potential victims, again, everybody is a victim of that use. The effects of cocaine use on a person's ability to operate or motor vehicle safety, they're likely to be speeding, moving a little quicker, losing control of the vehicle. So they're going to be aggressive behind the wheel. And likely to engage in high-risk behaviors such as threading the needle, passing when they really probably shouldn't be. They'll have poor impulse. They'll be the crazy cat in the picture, the video, right? But then remember that crash, the fatigue associated. And if they crash while driving, that fatigue could potentially lead to a micro sleep or then just flat out falling asleep at the wheel. So it's a very dangerous drug. Okay. Amphetamines, we can obtain those legally, right? So you can get a prescription for a medication. We used to be able to go to CVS, walk in and just pick a medication off the shelf to treat those cold and flu symptoms or our sinuses. But with the methamphetamines pandemic that we had there for a few years, we now have to go to the pharmacist, show our license, sign our life away, and beg for one of those boxes to be handed to us from behind the counter, right? So yes, you can obtain them legally. And it's, again, we have the effects of amphetamine use includes that false sense of alertness, that psychological addiction can enter in if they're misusing or abusing that product. They'll likely be very talkative with you, but and hyperactive at the same time. But it can lead to suicidal depression, brain damage, and even violent behavior. Because it absolutely impairs that person's judgment, their reasoning abilities, and so on. Okay. Now, the duration effects of amphetamines misuse or abuse includes that for a 4 to 8 hour window, and residual effects, depending again on what they're consuming and how much they're consuming, can last up to 12 hours. Okay. After effects of amphetamine use can include depression, in some cases severe depression, confusion, and very intense fatigue. So they've been running at a high level, they're hyperactive, go, 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 and then it's gone, it's over, and now they come down and crash. Okay. Now, the effects of that withdrawal, that crash, can last 1 to 3 days. So again, we have these lingering effects and feel bads going on, which can include that intense fatigue, uncontrollable sleepiness or catnapping. So dozing off at their desk or behind the wheel, hopefully never, but those things can occur. And then they're going to have a craving for more of that substance to get back to that perceived feel good, if you will. Abrupt discontinuation can result in extreme fatigue, mental depression, apathy, long sleeping periods, in some cases for 24 hours or even days, depending on how much they are consuming. And they will likely be very irritable in their interactions and communications, and exhibit a little bit of disorientation about the subject matter or what's going on. Okay. Now, methamphetamines falls under the amphetamines category on the DOT testing panel. Okay. And it is a synthetic drug. Made in clandestine laboratories, somebody's basement, the trunk of their car, out in the woods. We had an incident. I used to live on a lake for many, many years. It was a good sized lake. It wasn't like, Cumberland or miles and miles and miles, but it had coves and what have you. And I remember one of the neighbors woke up one morning, went down to their dock and found where somebody had taken their pontoon out during the night, must have pulled it into a little cove, made their methamphetamines on their pontoon, but they left all of their toxic debris and trash behind on the pontoon, and just took their drugs with them. So they had to call law enforcement out there, investigation and all of that. Literally, they will make it anywhere, and they will dump the trash in the garbage anywhere as well. And that stuff can be really toxic. We've had a lot of people injured, disfigured, and what have you, even killed from kids riding their bicycles down the roadway, and they see this cool igloo cooler just sitting there. It must have fallen out of somebody's truck. And they go over and pick it up or open it up, and then it's got these toxic chemicals, the waste, if you will, and so yeah, it's a bad thing, right? It stimulates movement and speed for the individual. It generates feelings of excitement, But it also leads to nervousness, insomnia. And again, with methamphetamines, that insomnia can be for days. So they could be up and going for days. So when they do crash, it could be for days, to recover from that. And they can become very, very paranoid under the influence of this substance. The substance can create visions and things going on that exacerbates that paranoia as well. I remember watching a video about some different addicts who were completing their recovery and talking about some of their experiences. And one lady talked about how she would see dark figures in her house, trees in her house, but there was really nothing there. But under the influence of that substance in her mind, she was terrified and trying to figure out how the trees got in the house, how these people got in her house, and so on and so forth. So it absolutely can exacerbate that paranoia and lead to visions and things like that. Post-use depression, fatigue, and an inability to experience pleasure is also associated. And again, it's highly, highly addictive. One hit of methamphetamines is usually enough to have that person be addicted to that substance. Oh, look, a yellow star. Ta-da! I'm on target now. I'm hitting it all 4 cylinders. Okay, so in this slide that discusses the characteristics of methamphetamines, there was a picture of a character from Star Wars. What character from Star Wars was in the picture? That will be the test question. Obviously, our answer is going to be R2-D2. And this is what methamphetamines does to a person, right? And I'll be showing you the faces of meth here in another slide or two. But it takes this pretty, shiny, highly intelligent, fully functioning robot and turns it into a filthy, nasty, smelly, disgusting subway garbage can, right? It absolutely has that impact on a person, on that person's brain, on their appearance, and so on and so forth. So again, we're going to pop up here a list of common street names for amphetamines and methamphetamines. We'll talk about why they are so commonly used in the transportation industry and the difference between amphetamines and methamphetamines, which I think I've already kind of addressed. Methamphetamines are a synthetic drug made using those chemicals that was in that picture earlier. So for the ammonia, the medications that we can't now have to sign and show a photo ID for behind the counter, lithium batteries, lighter fluid, and so on and so forth. And when you think about those chemicals and the fact that people are injecting or smoking and inhaling that and putting that in their bodies, it's no wonder that it has that kind of impact. So again, this is a short list of common street names. So again, we just want to be as familiar as we can be with some of the verbiage, some of those street names and lingo. So that way, again, that can be our hunch that if we hear somebody talking about some black beauties or getting some truck drivers when I get off work, that's our hunch to maybe spend a little more time interacting to see if we can substantiate those hunches, right? And here is that faces of meth that I promised you would be coming. So you can see in the top left here, this young lady in 2005, she didn't look that bad. You can see where meth was probably already starting to have an impact on her. But 2.5 years later, it looks like she aged literally 40 years in 2.5 years. The wrinkles, the sores from the scratching at the imaginary bugs and things, and what have you, what it's done to her hair, her eyes. It's just terrible. It's so sad and terrible that this drug has that impact and that people continue to try and use it to this day. So top right, we've got 4 years between the initial arrest photo for methamphetamines and the last one. Again, you can see this good-looking man who has significantly deteriorated. He's gaunt. you know, and it almost makes them unrecognizable from one to the next. So bottom left, 2.5 years between the initial and the last, and the one on the bottom right, it blends in with the picture, so I can't say, but I believe, if I recall correctly, that was 2.5 years between those arrest photos as well. So again, it's a very, very bad, dangerous drug that has horrible consequences and impacts on the individual users. The effects on driving can include them just driving off the road. I'm just going to go see what's over here in the field. They're gone. They are likely to be speeding. They could fail to stop. You know, oh, look, that light, it's really, really red, but it doesn't occur to them to stop. Diminish attentiveness, so they're not as focused on maintaining their safety zone and their space cushion. They're not, and because of that lack of focus, that can also lead to them not recognizing the need to make an adjustment in driving for somebody else's mistakes or bad behaviors that they're making. And it's likely to increase their aggressiveness behind the wheel. So they're going to become more impatient and intolerant of other people's bad behaviors and mistakes. They're going to lose that positive defensive driving attitude that they should and must maintain throughout the day. And ultimately, that's going to lead to more higher risk driving behavior of that individual. Okay. Now, ecstasy, or MDMA, also falls under the amphetamines category under the DOT panel. Some of the common effects include impaired judgment, fearlessness, so they're braver than they should be. It can lead to confusion, depression, blurred vision, severe anxiety, paranoia, again, as well. And then still we have the drug craving for more of that substance, okay? So ecstasy, what's it made from? Well, it depends on who's making it. So again, this is a synthetic drug made in clandestine laboratories, basements and the like. And it's very dangerous to use while driving, and we'll get into some of the symptoms and behaviors associated to help us better understand why. And the FDA started testing for ecstasy because we've seen an increase in its use across the country. And it does fall under that amphetamines category. And because we were seeing that increased use, we were seeing it in our industry. So they have added it to that panel. So that way we could capture that misuse or abuse. Okay, so again, we're going to start with common street names. And the other thing, again, you can read all of the names on here, but the thing that I like to point out that is most bothersome to me is the way the pills are made, right? It's almost like they're marketing to children, younger generations here, when they put the Nike swoosh or the happy face or their Superman emblem or a bunny rabbit or what have you, and they make them colorful and they look like Skittles or something to younger folks or kids. So the marketing for this product, and generally your ecstasy is used over the weekend. It's a club drug, a love drug. So again, it's usually used over the weekend, but that doesn't mean that addiction can't drive them to start abusing even during the weekdays. Now, after oral ingestion, effects begin in 20 to 30 minutes and last an hour or more, depending on what they're taking and how much they're taking. And here's the thing. This is another one of those substances that sometimes is mixed with other things. Again, they could have a hallucinogen added to it. It could have a cocaine or fentanyl or what have you in that MDMA pill, right? Now, general effects can last for 2 to 3 hours, but residual effects are usually gone within 24 hours. But again, just like with some of the other substances, we have these residual effects that can last for days or even several weeks. Again, depending on what they're consuming, what was actually in that little pill. Did it have other substances in there? So, and that use can lead to depression, confusion, and severe anxiety for the user. Now, some conditions that may have similar symptoms, again, mental illness or a very high fever. And when you think about that, that's kind of a profound statement, because it has that kind of effect that a similar symptom puts us in these two categories here, right? So effects occurring the following week could include severe exhaustion, real anxiety, depression. They're going to be dealing with some insomnia. So what happens is when they take this substance, they get all this energy and they can dance for hours with taking to next to no breaks. So again, that's why, the withdrawal symptoms, they're going, and that's wearing off. So insomnia, they're not going to be able to sleep because their body is still kind of functioning in combination with that substance. So they're going to be more irritable because they're having trouble getting to sleep. They're depressed. They're not feeling great. They're muscle tensions. For some users, I've heard them talk about how they caught themselves clenching their teeth to the point to where they were cracking their teeth, and some of them were having to see dentists because they were losing teeth and having damage done, and so on and so forth. So again, some of those are those are the symptoms following that weekend use, and again, colorful with all kinds of fun emblems. So that's sad to me. Effects on driving could be moderate regarding the vehicle control. But they also have an acceptance of higher risk behavior. So they're probably going to be more inclined to take chances that they wouldn't normally take otherwise. Acute changes of cognitive performance. So we're going to see increased likelihood of them making mistakes, again, with paperwork, interactions with passengers, or even in how they operate the vehicle. And it also impairs information processing. So they're likely to make mistakes, big mistakes, and have no clue. Just like the lady that leaves her baby on top of the car as she's driving down the road, and the officer's literally like, "Hey, here you go." Okay. All right. So this brings us to opioids. Opioids can be obtained legally as well with a prescription or what have you. It's used for the treatment of pain, but when misused, it can be a very, very bad thing. And oh, look, a yellow star. Boom, I'm clicking on these now. Got it going on. So in the title slide for opioids section of the presentation, there was a picture of a metal spoon, which was being heated up with a flame. What is the source of the flame? So as you can see here in our picture, that will be the candle is the source of our flame. So make a note of that for your test. It's so easy. We're telling you what the questions are and the answers. Yoo-hoo! All right, so the effects of opioid use can include, it does relieve pain. So if you got a boo-boo and an owie, it's going to help that. But it also causes drowsiness. It causes restlessness, especially when we arc into abusing that product. Indifference and relaxation. They're likely to be a little more accident prone, as well as having slower reflexes. Now, the disfigurement comes into when an individual is really abusing that substance, injecting and so on and so forth. That can cause disfigurement at the site of those injections and what have you. Yes, we did go over the STAR question, Jordan. The STAR question on that last slide, I'll go ahead and repeat it for you. In the title slides for opioids section of the presentation, there was a picture of a metal spoon which was being heated up with a flame. What was the source of the flame? And the answer is candle. Okay. So hopefully you got that now. Make a good note of it. If anybody else needs anything, let me know. Okay. Right. You are more than welcome, Jordan. Thank you. Okay. All right, so again, I'm going to throw up a list of street names, how opioids can be obtained legally. Well, we've talked about that. It's pain meds. It's our oxycodones, our codone, oxymorphones, codeine, and so on. What other risk factors are associated with heroin use? Because heroin falls into our opioids category here, right? So common street names, again, short list. So familiarize yourself with the common names and some of that verbiage. The duration effects for opioid use, it creates a intense euphoria that can last from 45 seconds to several minutes, again, depending on what they're using, the route of admission. Peak effects can last 1 to 2 hours. Overall effects can wear off within 3 to 5 hours, depending, again, on the dosage and route of administration. So you have pills, you have injections that you can take this product with. Now, the effects of withdrawal can begin 6 to 13 hours after the last dose. So again, we have residual effects and lingering effects associated. And some of those can last up to 5 to 10 days, depending on how much they've been consuming and the type of product they're consuming. Early symptoms can include watery eyes, a runny nose, yawning, or even profuse sweating or profuse sweating, if you will. Okay. Effects on driving, they're likely to be driving slow, weaving in their lane or from one lane to another. They're going to have that poor vehicle control again, slow response times, delayed reactions, and falling asleep at the wheel is a good probability. Okay. All dangerous, too dangerous for a transit operator. All right, so the last drug category that we needed to discuss and go over is pencyclidines, or PCP. And this is a really, really bad, dangerous drug, folks. It's scary, downright scary. The impact of pencyclidine use can include a complete departure from reality, superhuman strength, inability to feel pain, a disturbed perception, temporary insanity, and potentially suicidal behavior. It's a very, very scary drug when you think about the effects of that drug on an individual. And that's why, you know, we've probably seen the news stories, read the news stories, or seen a video here or there. And if not, I encourage you to do some Scooby-Doo work and try and find one of those resources to help you better understand. This is absolutely a substance that is going to make that person not even recognizable as far as their behavior. And they don't know what they're doing either in a lot of cases. You know, for example, we've seen some news stories where it took, 8, 10, 12 officers to get this person subdued and in handcuffs, and a lot of people who have never dealt with substance abuse on this level, or had to deal with somebody who's under influence and acting out under the influence of that substance. If we've not been directly involved in having to deal with that, it's really hard to understand. Again, if they're not feeling pain, and it's almost like they get this superhuman strength because they're not feeling pain, they just drive. Somebody can literally put their fist through a windshield, break every bone in their hand, and still keep punching with the same fist because they don't feel it. And their mind is so focused on what they're raging about or upset about that nothing else matters, right? So absolutely a scary, scary drug. The duration of effects can last 1 to 30 minutes, depending on the route of administration, whether it's injected, smoked, or what have you. There is a gradual decline of major effects of this substance over a 4 to 6 hour period. At one point, it was explained to me that PCP kind of works in stages. You have stage 1, which is the initial impact and high. Stage 2 which is where the crash or where they're coming off of that high stage 3, is the residual lingering effects. But some of those stage 4 is where it can go weeks and even months, the residual effects. And some folks will always, like for the rest of their life, in some cases, be dealing with some of those residual effects. Okay. The long-term effects, and it says it right here, can precipitate a psychotic reaction similar to schizophrenia. So again, it's very hard to really wrap our brains around and understand how dangerous and terrifying this drug is unless we've had some interaction experience or educated ourselves a little further with some of the videos and information. And that's why it's important to talk about it in this training as well. And it's similar symptoms, schizophrenia, and that should say a whole lot right there as well about the dangers associated with this substance. I've spent 10 years as a first responder in a volunteer fire company here in my local community, and so I spent a lot of years training. It was a very well-funded department, and you had to do a lot of training and what have you to maintain a full-time status with the department. And we worked with state troopers, sheriff's deputies, and local law enforcement officials throughout accidents, fires, and so on and so forth. And so I've heard some of the stories directly from some of those officers that have dealt with it. And as well as a lot of us in this industry have over the years. I remember Rob, who was the owner of RLS, she was telling me a story where she had talked to some officers in Boston, where they had encountered a gentleman under the influence of PCP that was just on a rage and in public, and it literally took 12 officers to get this guy subdued, handcuffed, and into the back of the police car. And once they got him into the back of the car, he continued to just go wackadoodle, just banging and kicking and everything else. And they were like, you know what? We'll just leave him in there till we get him to the station, get him in the garage where we have a controlled environment and there's no citizens around that could be impacted or injured as a result of this. So that's what they did. They took him to the station, she said, and got him into the garage. And when they opened that car door, he came out of that car fighting as hard as he went in, but he had ripped his hand off trying to get out of those cuffs so that he could fight. But it didn't slow him down, right? He didn't know, he didn't care. He just wanted to fight. That's the impact this kind of drug can have on a person's psyche and ability to be rational and interact. So, and again, a lot of drugs are being mixed these days with different ones. So there's other psychoactive drugs, peyote and what have you, that could also be mixed in with substances and create similar effects. When I said it like that. Okay. All right, so now we've covered the 5 drug categories that are tested for under the DOT's testing program. So now we're going to get into that intervention, interaction, and referral process, the things we do and do not do, the things we say and do not say as we go through that process, okay? So you as a supervisor, your role is to be aware of potential problems, which means you have to know your employees well enough to know what's normal behavior and what's abnormal behavior. Some people are naturally hyperactive. Adult ADHD is a real thing, right? But if we don't spend enough time with folks to know that that's a normal behavior, that might be something that we're considering as a trigger. Get to know those employees that are normally well groomed, how they speak, how they interact with folks. You can't identify objective facts, signs, symptoms, and behaviors if you don't know the difference between what's normal and what's not, right? So we need to interact with our folks. We need to get to know some things. Now, there are some signs, symptoms, and behaviors that will likely always take us down that road of making a decision to test. And you can do that without really knowing a person. You can observe signs, symptoms, and behaviors. But it's much more helpful if we know enough about the person to know the difference. All right. And you must look for the presence of other indicators, because any one thing taken alone can sometimes be explained. I mean, we're still in cold and flu season in the winter. People are getting sick, they're taking medications, you know. So we have to use a little bit of common sense as we're making these assessments, and look for more than one indicator to substantiate our understanding and help. Okay, Michelle says, I can see the slides, or you can't see the slides.
We can see the slides. Someone isn't able to see the slides, so I told them to leave and then come back in and see if that helps.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, one
I
of
see
our,
okay.
Yeah. So I'm going to see if that helps, if he just leaves the training and comes back in. Usually that fixes everything.
Right. Okay. All right. Sorry, I was trying to kind of monitor that.
Yeah, no, I was trying to help him so you wouldn't be interrupted. So we'll figure it out.
You're awesome. Thank you so much, Julie. I appreciate you.
You're welcome. Sure.
All right. From there, supervisors should, again, document changes over time, address performance issues when they occur. You know, whether that is just a conversation with a note to file, or it's something that justifies the need to actually do disciplinary action. We need to address performance issues. And then look again, we want to document each reasonable suspicion test referral as soon as possible after making our observations and completing the testing process. The more time that goes by, the more we are likely to lose some of those important details that helped us make the decision that we have made. Now, we don't want to delay testing necessarily for us to do our documentation and paperwork, because then we're delaying the test. And time is critical. Remember, alcohol dissipates in the body. So the more time they have, the more likely we are not to get a result, if that was in fact the problem. So again, we don't want to delay testing in order to get our documentation completed. But you want to make sure that as soon as possible that you can get to completing that documentation, so you don't lose any of those details. Sometimes it's a best practice as you're making the observations, maybe just make some quick notes on some key factors. The eyes, just bright eyes. And when you go to sit down and do your documentation, you see your note, eyes, sweating, staggering, and then you can speak to that. It helps to trigger your memory with that documentation of the event. Okay. And we should have a standardized process for documenting that decision-making process and referral. The referral must satisfy 3 key criteria, and that's first and foremost is it must be based on objective facts, not what somebody said, not what you heard through the grapevine. It has to be objective facts. Okay, something you yourself were able to see, smell, hear, or observe, and that you can detail document those observations yourself. Okay. It's also good when we're walking through the process, decision-making process, ask ourselves if Bob was here, who is also a trained supervisor, would he come to the same conclusion and order a test as well? Walk yourselves through this mental process. And then finally ask yourself, is it less responsible not to require a test? So let me ask y'all a question, and I'm going to pause long enough for hopefully a few of you to type something in the chat, because I just, curiosity, what is the tragedy? Is there a tragedy, rather, if we do a test and it comes back negative? We were wrong. It's not, they're not under the influence of anything. What is the tragedy and doing a reasonable suspicion test and it coming back negative? Is there anything tragic about that at all? And so again, I'll give folks just a minute here to maybe type in a response or two, so that way I can kind of get a feel for the room. But we walk ourselves through this kind of question and answer process. Here's the thing: courts have consistently ruled against employers who knew or should have known that an employee's ability to perform their safety sensitive functions was adversely affected and done nothing to intervene. Okay, so essentially what that means is you got to have ESP, right? So that and some kind of interaction so that you can determine whether or not a person's ability to perform is adversely affected or not. And if we don't have those daily interactions or regular interactions, it's going to be very hard for us to do that, right? No downside, as long as the driver understands why it needed to be done. You're absolutely correct, Seth. There is no tragedy in doing this test and it being negative. We just ruled that out as a factor that led us to be concerned. So in some cases, I know we had a reasonable suspicion test here a few years ago where the manager had made these observations. They done their due diligence. They checked the boxes. They done their assessment. They ordered the test. They informed the employee, took them for the test and everything. The test come back as negative. But as some of you may or may not know, in the regulations for the drug and alcohol testing program, if the medical review officer identifies something within that test result, it's not a verified positive because it's not positive for these 5 drug categories, but they see something else that comes up in that test result that could be considered a significant safety risk, then the MRO is required to contact you and inform you that, the test has been reported as negative. However, we did identify a substance that is of a significant safety risk. The problem is the regulations kind of go silent on what to do with that information. So then the question becomes, okay, so the MRO called me and told me I have a significant safety risk. What do you do? Do you do anything? Have you had that conversation? Do you address it in your policy? Do you have an established protocol? Because again, we've ruled out substance abuse as an issue, but that doesn't mean that we don't still have a concern here. And that's where I don't know how familiar anybody is with the FDA's prescription over-the-counter medication toolkit. And back in the early 2000s, when we saw an increase of incidences associated with the misuse or abuse of prescription over-the-counter medicines, there was a real push and strongly worded Dear Colleagues letter that come from the FDA to all transit providers, encouraging us to implement some kind of prescription over-the-counter medication, education, and policy to address a reporting or a requirement or a need to have that looked at to determine whether or not it affects ability to perform safety sensitive functions. So in the example that I'm providing, the driver, was called into the office. The manager had a conversation with them about it. And they had recently had a change in medication with their treating physician, and that medication, that change, was having a bad interaction with his other medicines. So he was able to get back in to see his doctor, get that straightened out. So in effect, we essentially helped that driver in that given situation. So there's nothing wrong with ordering the test and it being negative. But that also led us to develop, here in Indiana, we have what we call the medical qualification program, where every driver, regardless of license, has to have a CDL standard physical, and they have to report all prescription and over-the-counter medication use. And any changes in that use also has to be reported. Now, we have a provider in Indiana University Health that fields all of that and handles it and either qualifies, disqualifies, or otherwise advises the transit system. You don't have to go that far, but I do encourage you to do something that addresses the significant safety risk and how you are going to handle that notification if you receive it from the MRO. Cindy says, if you don't mind me sharing, when we hire, we asked about prescription because of the testing. And when it comes to the DOT testing, we don't care about those prescriptions or that over-the-counter medication use. They don't need to report it. We don't need to have a conversation about it. If there's a positive test, the medical review officer will then have that conversation with that employee. That's their purpose. Their reason is to determine if there's a valid medical reason. So the MRO will ask about prescriptions and medications. What I'm talking about is the in-between. What are we doing anything to mitigate, educate, or address misuse of prescription or over-the-counter medications? Do we have any education about that? Do we have a way to address a significant safety risk notification? So, for example, you don't want to send somebody to their treating physicians because they're going to be like, it's all good. So you should probably have identified a vendor, and it could be the testing company, that maybe looks at that and gives you direction on whether or not it's really a hazard. So, for example, under our medical qualification program, if they have a change in a medication, there's a form that they fill out. They don't send it to the manager. The transit system doesn't get it. That individual is asked to send it directly to Indiana University Health. And then the medical determination officer, as defined in our program, looks at that information, compares it with that individual's chart and their other medications. And if he says, okay, she's taking it at night, not in the morning, there is no safety risk, she's cleared to go. And then you have documentation for somebody that shows and says what the determination was for that individual and their circumstances. So again, there's no requirement to have anything like that, but I do encourage you to at least have a conversation and establish some kind of protocol for addressing it should it come up. Okay. Now, when it comes to initiating the referral process, we want to make sure that it's non-confrontational, because guess what, folks? You could be wrong. It could be negative. So if we go in there and we're accusational, we're confrontational, we're using the wrong verbiage in that conversation, then if it comes back negative, then that could lead to libel against us. It could put us in an awkward situation as a manager or a supervisor. So it should never be confrontational. We never want to accuse anybody of having a substance abuse problem or an alcohol misuse or abuse problem. So no accusations. We don't need to be good cop, bad cop, and try and solicit a confession either, right? The test is going to tell us what we need to do. Okay? We need to make sure that this conversation occurs in a private location that provides both visual as well as oral privacy to you and the individual that you will be discussing the observations and test requirement with. We want to provide them with all of the confidentiality that we would want in that similar circumstance. And again, especially if it turns out to be negative. We don't want, oh, Betty's in there. She's getting right over the cold. She's going to have to pee in a cup, right? We want to give them the confidentiality and privacy necessary to deal with this situation. Because again, it could end up being something else. Even if you know you're smelling alcohol, never say those things. Never allude to that. Instead, we are going to plan our script of what we are going to say during that interaction. Okay. And I know that sometimes planned conversations don't always go as planned. Somebody throws something out there we weren't anticipating, and now we're all thrown off our game because we didn't have that in our script. In this example, you're going to develop a script and you're going to stick to it no matter what. No matter what they say, and you're going to anticipate them questioning you. They're going to deny that there's a problem or that you really saw what you saw. In some cases, they may threaten you. And in the majority of situations, they sit there, they're very quiet, they're very cooperative, and then after the test is over, they just disappear and you never hear or see from them again. That's what happens in a lot of cases, but there is the potential for these other things. So again, you're going to plan your script on what you're going to say, and you're going to stick to the script. You want to show care and concern for the employee throughout this intervention or an interaction, and notifying them of the requirements. And yes, we should tell them what the observations were that led us to make this decision to do a fitness for duty evaluation to determine whether or not they can safely perform their safety sensitive duties. And this is where I'm going to ask you to pay very close attention to some of the verbiage that I'm using in this discussion. Okay, we're always going to focus the whole conversation back to the primary issue, which is safety. So it doesn't matter what I understand what you're saying and why you might see it that way. But again, we have to ensure the safety of our services and our community. And as such, we are concerned about your ability to perform your safety sensitive duties. So we're going to do a fitness for duty evaluation, which is essentially a reasonable suspicion test, so we can rule this out as a potential factor. Your job as supervisors is to inquire and observe, get to know your people, again, so you can tell what's normal and what's not. Make your observations, verify the facts, right? Review your findings, make the decision as to whether or not you will or will not test. Isolate in that confidential manner, providing visual and oral privacy, that employee, and inform them of your observations and the requirements to comply with this test. Transport the employee to the collection site. Now, to be clear, there is nothing in the regulations that requires you to transport an employee to a collection site for a test. However, if we have reason to believe that this person may be under the influence of illegal drugs or misusing or abusing alcohol, the last thing we want to do is assume the liability of saying, get in the car and drive across town to the collection site. Woo! Don't do that. And that's why we say it's a best practice that you transport them. Okay, so when you're transporting them, one, they're not behind the wheel in case there really is a problem. Two, they're directly supervised. So now they don't have time and opportunity to circumvent the testing process by stopping by the house and getting their urine pills or stopping somewhere and chugging gallons of water real quick on the way. So there's that supervisory component that is also a part of that transport to that collection site. And then when the test is over, you can either transport them back to the agency or transport them home, but we can't stop them from getting in their car and driving. Okay. So understand that. So supervisor dues, know your employees. What's normal, what's not. Document job performance regularly, especially failure to perform, with notes to file that you can monitor as they grow or not. Take action when job performance fails. Don't create an environment where nobody thinks the rules are really going to apply. Because again, that can set a precedent, and then other folks think that they can do the same thing, and then you might as well throw the policies and the rules out the window. Document objective facts that justify your decision to proceed forward with a test. And then know how to get help for your employees too. Does your agency have an EAP program where you can refer them? Now, the regulations, the DOT regulations require that we provide a referral to a DOT qualified substance abuse professional for any positive test or refusal to test. So you're required to do that anyway. And you want to make sure that that documentation is completed in such a manner that you have a copy for your record, as well as that individual has that referral with a name, address, and phone number of 2 DOT qualified SAPs. And ultimately, we just really want to make sure that we do not allow unfit employees to perform safety-sensitive job duties that can negatively impact our communities as well as our programs and services. And in the long term at that, right? So, all right, supervisor don'ts. Again, we don't need a confession. You don't need to be good cop, bad cop. You do not need to diagnose the employee. Again, the test is going to tell us what we need to know. Okay. You also cannot discuss your suspicions with other non-supervisory employees that do not have a need to know about drugs and alcohol. So I remember when I first started the program and I went through my first federal audit, the FTA auditors, George Gilpatrick is awesome. I have learned more from that man over the years than I think I have from most of the other subject matter experts out here. But he kind of explained to me in this manner. You make a list of everybody that needs to know about drug and alcohol, and then you rip the list in half. You want to reduce, so typically a small rural public system, 20 employees or less, you have a drug and alcohol program manager that oversees and manages the program. You have a designated employer representative that can fulfill the DAPM's duties in their absence. So they're also trained on reasonable suspicion, post-accident, and the like. And then sometimes you'll have a driver, supervisor, operations manager. Sometimes it's the lead driver that is trained in reasonable suspicion. And so you have these folks that can make these decisions, and those are the only folks that really need to know about drug and alcohol testing. So sometimes it doesn't always include the executive director or the mayor of the town. Or the HR director in some cases. If the DAPM is the transit manager and the DER is the assistant manager, sometimes that even puts HR out of the loop on drug and alcohol testing requirements and how you pursue completing and meeting the requirements. So again, we don't discuss our suspicions or the need to complete testing or anything with anybody that doesn't absolutely need to know or be a part of the process. Again, never accuse an employee of having an actual problem, because it could be something else that we were observing signs, symptoms, and behaviors about. And never put in writing that an employee has a substance abuse problem. So that kind of brings us to the point of where now we need to discuss about what we say and how we write it. So how you begin a conversation on this subject matter will determine a win, lose, or outcome for you and or the employee. Okay. So what that means is, and for example, if we were to say, I think that you are under the influence of marijuana, I'm sending you for a reasonable suspicion test. Okay, so essentially we've made an accusation of somebody using an illegal substance. So the win-lose outcome is like this. If the test comes back positive, whew, we win, right? But if it comes back negative, we could be in some hot water with that verbiage, especially if we actually use that verbiage in any of our written documentation as well. Okay, so what we need to do is, again, plan the conversation, think through what we're going to say. I'm concerned about your readiness to perform safety-sensitive functions. I am required to refer you for a test to rule out any chemical impairment as being a potential factor here. And again, we're just concerned about your ability to perform your safety-sensitive functions. So we just need to make sure you're fit for duty. Win-win outcome, whether it's positive or negative. Okay, so again, think through what you're going to say. Plan that script. No matter what they say, I hear what you're saying. I understand that your perspective. Unfortunately, I really have a responsibility to you, the agency, and our community to ensure fitness for duty. So we're still going to move ahead with this testing requirement. Doesn't matter what they say. You're always going to come back to that script. You're always going to come back and revisit that same thing. Maybe you word it a little differently, but you're always going to come back to it. Okay? Oh. Here we are. The last test question. There's no yellow star, though. So I almost would have missed this. What was the keyword indicator provided at the end of the webinar? I might be 10, 15 minutes early. Oh no, I'm at the end of the webinar. So the keyword indicator is obviously rose. Okay, so again, make a note of the question and the answer for your test so that you do well on that. I made the mistake of not changing the last slide of the presentation to include my email address. So you have Sean he would still be more than happy to field any questions or comments or commentary about today's webinar or additional assistance or what have you. So please feel free to use that contact information to reach out to him if you need or would like to. My email address is vwarner, so V is in Victor, Warner, WARNER, at that rlsandassociates.com web address. So if you would like to email me and tell me how horrible I was, or if you have a question, feel free to do that if we don't get that taken care of before the webinar closes. That being said, we are in question and answer mode since we are at the end of our presentation. So I'd really like to hear from you folks. Any questions, comments, or commentary you have about today's webinar, the material that we have covered, the testing category itself of reasonable suspicion, and so on. So hopefully, Julie, we see those things come through. I think everybody is unmuted and can speak freely anyway. Is that correct?
They can unmute themselves if they have any questions or raise their hand.
Okay.
I was provided a link that I'll be sending out to everyone for the quiz. Is that correct? I got that from Sean, and I'll be emailing that to everyone right after we're done. We highly recommend, and Sean mentioned, to take the quiz right away. Don't wait. Go ahead, Vicki. Do you have more to add to that?
I do. The test link will remain open for 5 business days. But again, he does encourage you to take it as soon as possible. The sooner we take that and close that out, the sooner he can get those certificates of completion for the training issued and sent out to everybody. Okay.
Yeah. Any questions, anyone? Doesn't look like it. Guess not.
Well, that's all right. Well, like I said, you have Sean's contact information. I've given you my email address. You can also reach me through the Dayton office as well. So if you do generate a question, or maybe you were just too shy to ask it on the webinar, that's okay. You can still reach out to us and get that question answered after the webinar closes. So just don't be shy in doing so. Cindy says, I've really enjoyed the training. Thank you. Well, thank you, Cindy, very much for letting us know that you did enjoy it and you got something out of it. I hope everybody else has as well. So I guess, Julie, unless you have any wrap-up comments here, we'll get ready to close then.
No, I don't. I just want to say thank you again for stepping in. I know it was short notice for you today, so we really appreciate your time. And it was a great training. Great slides.
Awesome. Good. That always makes me happy to hear things like that. It motivates me. So yeah, wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you, Julie. It was a pleasure meeting and working with you on today's webinar. And I want to take this time and opportunity to thank each one of you for what you do. We absolutely provide quality of life to folks in our communities every day. So y'all are my heroes. You always will be. So thank you for what you do. Thank you for taking the time to attend today's webinar on this important topic. And again, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to follow up with us. We're more than happy to help. And hopefully we'll see you at a future webinar. So thank you.